Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a pretty crazy day, so I figured I'd join the host of other people doing live. So sorry if I'm cutting into their audiences and whatnot, to go live to talk about the coup mainly, and to have a Q&A, and also to celebrate you guys being so wonderful and having over 19,842 subscribers, because I love arbitrary numbers. So I'm really happy with that. I'm so grateful to the wonderful people who support this channel. And we'll come to that a little bit later. But hey, let's talk about the coup. My goodness, what an insane situation we have in Russia at the moment. There's a few bits and pieces to share with you on top of the the late night half cut breaking news update I did last night, on top of today's news piece I did this morning, and then the little bits of extra stuff I added in the mapping update subsequently. So anyway, let's go and have a look then at some of these bits and pieces going on. So just to let you know, to remind you what's happened, if you aren't aware, we have a situation where Prigozhin claimed that his a military base of Wagner troops was attacked in Ukraine by rockets. That I doubt that happened. That's just my speculation. I think this has been quite long in the planning. It must have been. You can't just have your base attacked one day, supposedly by the Russian MOD, and then go, right, we're marching on Moscow now. You know, you have to put those things in place. And that's not just in terms of the logistics, but also in terms of trying to work out who you've got in support. We'll talk about sleeper cells and things going forward in a little while. But you know, you've got to put sounders out, to feelers out, sorry, to make sure you've got enough support. I mean, it seems like Prigozhin's on his own at the moment, marching towards Moscow, and that's a problem because I don't think he's got huge popular support across the population, because I don't think that many people know about him, not like we do in the Western media and in these kind of information spaces. And at the moment, no one has publicly come out to support Prigozhin. Everyone appears to have supported Putin so far, and that might be significant. But anyway, what's happened? Well, you've got this city of Rostov on Don, which is in the Rostov Oblast here, the region that borders the occupied eastern areas of Ukraine. That is interesting because he's kind of taken control of Rostov, or at least taken control of certain military installations there, the airport and the Southern Military District headquarters. There's, I think, an explosion in the Southern Military District headquarters has just happened. There are tanks on the road, there are blockades, and so on and so forth. So, for all intents and purposes, Wagner control Rostov. Then they have gone north, either through the Rostov Oblast or possibly through occupied Ukraine, to pop up in the Voronezh Oblast here, and then taking that route north to Voronezh itself. And there are the claims about things going on in Voronezh, but then it's into the Lipetsk Oblast, north of Voronezh, where apparently they are now. So they are getting closer to Moscow. This is obviously very serious. Now, I said in my earlier piece, in my news piece, that I think this is the beginning of the end for the military project, for the war in Ukraine, and I don't think Russia can come back from this, no matter how successful it is or isn't. So, and sorry to repeat myself, but if Prigozhin fails completely, then they still have to deal with him. He's the most competent, it seems, or at least Wagner have achieved the most in the Russian military project. And so getting rid of him and all the people who support him, you know, what do you do with those troops? Do you put them in prison? Do you know, so on and so forth? That's a massive issue, and it degrades your capacity and your capability going forward from a Russian point of view. And if Prigozhin completely succeeds, then there's absolute chaos across Russia. There's absolute chaos in terms of the army, what's going to go on politically. That is not going to help the Russian war efforts in Ukraine as well. So no matter what happens, no matter where you are along that spectrum of activity, or that spectrum of outcome, sorry, the Russian war effort is going to be screwed. I can't see them, you know, coming back from this. It might not be immediate, but it might also be immediate. You know, we might see things in the coming days, or it just might undermine it in far more uh, long-term ways going forward. So this is a problem. I think this is the beginning of the end for the war, and that's fantastic. But who would have predicted it would have come? Well, I guess there would be some wily and prescient people that saw this coming. I mean, there was this growing tension between the two that was coming super problematic, and he was being really, really overtly critical. Right, let's go and look at some of, let's get the right setting here. So some of what's going on. Ilya Ponomarenko, who writes for the Kiev Independent, says Prigozhin might appear far better prepared and forward-looking than we expect. He's not only going all in against Moscow with some 25,000 of his core force, but he's also very probably having sleeper cells of supporters in the regular military and retired Wagner mercs across Russia, and also prisons. I do wonder about the kind of support that he is going to have, Prigozhin, because although there will be great amounts of loyalty from his well-trained core Wagner units, and that appears to be the case, and although he may be attracting some people from the Russian conventional military who are either not standing up to him or joining him, there will also be some people. I'm sure a lot of the convicts are going to be pretty much hating Wagner because of the way that they were used and the way that he keeps control over those forces, sledgehammering people to death and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know whether he's going to be able to rely on that kind of loyal support from everyone that's involved in the war. Uh, yeah, something to think about. Anyway, right, going back to the sources, let's go and look at the wider picture. And this is fascinating, right? Okay, so Putin called his allies to get support. He has called the members of the CSTO, the sort of Russian NATO of the Caucasus nations to the south and east of Russia. President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, and the head of Kazakhstan, Tokayev. But the president of Kazakhstan, Tokayev, refused to support Putin. Wow. So we've already seen them being pretty difficult, Kazakhstan, recently. They're demanding money off the Russian space agency. I think they take off from Kazakhstan, and they are in debt, and they called the bailiffs in on them, and that's interesting. But the ruler, the president, has been quite vocal in his lack of support for Putin recently. Putin himself called his Kazakh colleague, but the Kazakh said that Prigozhin's rebellion was an internal affair of Russia. Ouch. So that is very significant. Lukashenko, I think, has supported Putin, but what's going on here? The jet of Belarus dictator Lukashenko, his family jet, if you like, has taken off from Belarus and is now in the sky over Turkey. Upon entering Russian airspace, the aircraft turned off the transponders and turned them on only over Kalmykia when exiting Russia. What does that say? So we don't know who's on board, but either his family's on board. You can bet that some important people to do with Lukashenko are on board there. So why are they getting sent to Turkey? And if Lukashenko's on board, oh dear, Putin, and possibly, oh dear, Belarus. There have been some calls to get to. I think some Ukrainian commanders have called on opportunism in terms of Belarusian rebellion and whatnot. So you could see some activity in Belarus. There could be a bit of a dominoes effect. Not for certain, but there's a possibility. Now, Putin's plane has taken off from Moscow towards St. Petersburg. That is very significant. And you can probably understand it's geographically further to St. Petersburg. So as these chaps are marching north through Lipetsk towards Moscow, then St. Petersburg offers a little bit more security for Putin and his immediate staff. So that is taking place A pair of Russian VIP jets, RA696022 and IL96-300PU, and RA73025, if you wanted to know, A319115CJ, for those who like letters and numbers, are leaving Moscow Vnukovo Airport, International Airport, most likely evacuating to St. Petersburg Pulkovo Airport. Wow, okay. He is running. A possible flying command post is also doing the same. Obviously, that would be sensible. It's about safety first in that case. Another interesting map-based factoid to give you is, well, the nuclear weapons storage base near Voronezh. That is important, and we wonder if Voronezh comes under Wagner control. Would Wagner have control over nuclear weapons? Now, it's not to say he would have the ability to fire them. There'll be lots of fail safes in place, but my goodness, that makes things pretty interesting. Okay, going back to you guys in the just seeing if there's any questions. Yeah, rats leaving a sinking ship. Exactly. Anyone heard China's musings? I haven't as of yet, but it's just really my headspace at the moment is full of just so much stuff, and there's going to be so much information coming out. They might well have said something already, or possibly just keeping quiet. A bit like the Russian voices on my threads this morning seem to be rather silent. I don't have any trolls giving their opinion on things. I wonder why that is. Macabari says Shoigu is reportedly already in Turkey. So Shoigu is the defense minister and Prigozhin's enemy, kind of number one, him and Gerasimov, I guess. There are reports that he was in Rostov-on-Don when this all kicked off, and then did a runner and is somewhere in Rostov-on-Don, but that's kind of unconfirmed. And Macabari saying he's reportedly in Turkey. Who knows? But he has not come out in public yet, which I guess could be pretty significant in and of itself. Carlos says he's a troll. Yeah, but some trolls are good trolls. Right. Okay. So to return, let's go back to look at so we've looked at the nuclear weapons. Now let's look at a few other things. Apparently riots of convicts have begun in Moscow at a pre-trial detention center. I think there's audio footage of that out there somewhere as well. So this is happening. Just as I say, dominoes. It's all happening at once. And I said all of this is good for Ukraine. It is in the immediate, and sorry to repeat myself, but there are worries that if Prigozhin, for example, so the one end of the spectrum is Prigozhin is completely successful. Imagine he becomes president of Russia. Now, Prigozhin is a realist. Okay, so that bear that in mind. So when he's been giving all the criticisms of the Russian MOD, he has been talking a lot about the real losses that Ukraine have exacted on the Russians. So he's talked a lot about that and saying things are bad. He was talking today, I think, was it, is one of his speeches today, saying that the Russians were losing 1,000 troops a day. X, Y, and Z, very much in line with the general staff. Now, is he lying? Is he kind of spinning things for his own agenda? Maybe, but he is a realist. So if he was to get into power, you've got arguably two Prigozhins here. You've got the ultra nationalist psycho who has been doing horrible things on the front, and he might then take over the war machine and control it himself and go even harder on Ukraine, right? So that is one option. Or there's a realist option where he's actually got his finger on the pulse a lot more and knows that the whole battle. I mean, he was talking. I didn't get to share it with you yesterday, but there are two other parts of the chat he had, the rant he had, where he's talking about why the invasion in Donbass took place, and etc. etc. He's basically blowing away all the pro-Russian propaganda narrative and saying it, talking about it being what it really is, right? This whole war and the reasons behind it. So if he was to get into power, he could go crazy and attack Ukraine and go even harder, or he could go, this is all a facade. And yes, I was involved, but it was being done poorly, and the rationale behind it was poor, and the intelligence was poor. So actually, I'm in charge of Russia, and we're pulling out. So you could see that as well. And I don't know. This is all complete speculation, of course, and that's given him succeeding anyway, and that is not a given at all. Right, so to return, where was I? Right. We are now looking to Voronezh. As you can see there, there's a large explosion. Now, I think there is also, in fact, I've got it over here on my sticky note. So I think there was an oil, let's put that in here. I'm pretty sure this is it. Yeah, an oil depot has caught fire near Voronezh. Whether this is the oil depot, I don't know. Further alight, that's a larger fire than this one. I'm not sure. I mean, that's dark black smoke that pretty much shows that's oil. That looks like fuel as well, and the size of that is almost certainly fuel. So that could have nothing to do with Wagner. It could have been Wagner who did that, or it could have been a drone, a Ukrainian drone hitting an oil depot in Voronezh. That's completely plausible as well. So not quite sure. As we go on, so this is Michael Weiss, who's a good journalist, has done some excellent work for Yahoo News. Explains Western intel saying Prigozhin was dramatizing the ammo shortfall. If this is true, he was stockpiling it for exactly this moment. So there's this theory that Prigozhin was not seriously in ammunition, uh, having ammunition issues with regard to shell hunger and the MOD not providing Wagner with enough stuff. It might well have been, as some people are saying, that he was getting enough stuff, but just wanted more to stockpile, or he was not getting enough stuff. Yeah, on show he wasn't getting enough stuff because actually he was siphoning a bunch off for this moment. He knew this was coming, starting to stockpile, ready for this kind of coup. Michael Weiss had said previously the whole of April and May, Prigozhin lied about the alleged projectile famine. The 1st and 7th assault squads have a huge stockpile of manpads and captured javelins. A source from Prigozhin's security service said that preparations for this scenario took more than 2 months. Wow. Okay, so it's not just a flash in the pan last minute decision. Also captured javelins. It now appears likely US weapons will be used by the Russians inside Russia. Who knew that would happen? And we'll come to some of that footage in a second. He also says, I'd be surprised if, in addition to stockpiling munitions for this event, Prigozhin and Wagner haven't also been recruiting Russian military, FSB, law enforcement, etc. Even if you ignore rumors about defections, this has been remarkably easy so far. So far, this is absolutely true. We know that they've pretty much waltzed through. Well, they've taken over Rostov on Don without a shot being fired. They've waltzed through Rostov, got to Voronezh, very little resistance. They've gone over the border, not had resistance from FSB or conventional forces in coming out from Ukraine, where those were commands from the Russians to stop them doing that. They were able to do that. So they've got people who are supporting them or are passively allowing them to do stuff. They've gone to Voronezh with virtually no resistance, and then are in Lipetsk now. So you would imagine if this has been several months into planning, and it had to have been, you can't just do this ad hoc. You need all the resources in place, but as I said earlier, you need to make sure you got the support in Moscow, in hierarchies. You've got sleeper cells. You've got people in the military who will turn coat for you. So yeah, I would agree with these kind of speculations here from Michael Weiss. Yeah, this has been remarkably easy, and I'm pretty sure that they would have been recruiting Russian military, FSB, and law enforcement. And he's openly recruited. So he got the logistics head is now his number 2 from the MOD. So he's taken some scouts in that respect. So we're now seeing trenches being dug on the outskirts of Moscow. We've gone from in 2 days we'll take Kiev to Moscow being defended from its own. I mean, what an incredible turnaround that is! Absolutely staggering. So yeah, we'll take, and this goes back to kind of Russian voices and Russian shills and trolls. Yeah, Bakhmut's fallen. It'll be like dominoes from now. It's next step Kiev. It's like, really? Because actually, Ukraine took two roads in Bakhmut today, so that ain't happening. There ain't any dominoes, and it looks like you've got a coup going on. So jog on, sunshine. Uh, there you go. So trolls, hey. Right, let's now look at some of the activity. Right, Dmitry says absolute madness. Let's see if they can get to Moscow. So far, the Russian army appears to be either on a standby or doesn't know what to do. I'm not seeing major resistance. The whole city of Rostov was given up without a fight, so on and so forth. Someone says here, but look at Rostov. The young people standing around there seem to be very much on Wagner's side. They do not look or act fearful. This might just be a regime change uh, of Russia coming faster than most of us thought it would ever happen. It just so happens that both Putin and Prigozhin are psychotic thugs, and that is the worry, right? If you're replacing one bad apple with an even more rotten apple. Okay, this is a Wagner member addressing the socials here, putting his voice out there. What does he say? Let's have a look. It's nice and short. So he says, I'm in a private residential area in Voronezh Oblast. So that's the one north of Rostov. We already took down 3 helicopters and 1 transport plane. I showed you footage of one of those helicopters being taken down and the transport plane being taken down. So that's been confirmed by Wagner themselves. 3 Russian helicopters. 2 of them were electronic warfare helicopters. Those are high value targets in terms of the whole kind of war effort. It's an intense firefight here. So he is saying there is fighting in Voronezh. We broke through the defense of a Tuva degenerates. Next, we will only be moving to Moscow. A request to the armed forces to not resist us. This is interesting what he's got behind him, by the way. Is that an N-law or is that a javelin? That's yeah, important to note. Do not resist us, he says to the armed forces. Victory will be ours. Yeah. Moving on, this is pretty. I like this footage actually. This just from a military point of view. You got a Russian helicopter here. That's oh, sorry, I'm trying to won't let me. Yeah, there we go. So there's the Russian helicopter. So it sends off its flares, chaff, whatever it is, and that actually succeeds in being decoys for that missile, that manpad probably it's been sent up against it, and that then seems to detonate on something to the left of this cameraman filming, so some kind of building or something. It seems to be an explosion, but that helicopter has a very close shave uh, with an explosion, and it manages to just avoid it. That's pretty significant. Well, that's the most important button that pilot will ever press in his life, is setting off those flares. Okay, what else? Well, the Kadyrovites. So we have Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord, who who is very supportive of the Russian war project. He's also not a big fan of Prigozhin, and there's been this tension between those two. Well, he has come out in support of Putin. So again, everyone seems to publicly at the moment be supporting Putin and the Kremlin. And he's one of them. And he is now entering Rostov. So we are literally looking like there is some kind of civil war going on. You've got Chechens going to fight against Wagner in Rostov, whilst Wagner are on the march up north. Now, this could be a bit of a problem if the Chechens are then going to hit them down where they are in the south, and most of them are transporting themselves further up north in Voronezh and Lipetsk, spreading themselves thin. I mean, 25,000 sounds like an awful lot, but when you're trying to have a coup that's going to be successful for a country that size, and you're waltzing through 4 oblasts to get to Moscow, and you've got enemy soldiers harrying you at your kind of base, if you like, then things are going to be difficult. There's another bit of footage of Akhmat in Rostov here, driving on their APC there. not particularly quickly, has to be said, but they are in Rostov, it looks like. So, yeah, we'll see how that develops. Now, reportedly, this is footage of a Russian MOD strike on Wagner military equipment on the M4 highway on their way to Moscow. This has been shared by military bloggers. I cannot verify this. Same with anything going on at the moment. Take everything with a good deal of skepticism. Healthy skepticism is always useful. But here you have a really significant explosion there that looked like a civilian truck as well. But I don't know. Even civilian vehicles could be being used by Wagner. So that seems to have stopped. Seems to be part of this convoy. Could well be part of the Wagner team there, and that's taken a really significant hit. Uh, what else is happening? Well, here we have Russian forces striking at a column of the PMC Wagner. I don't know where this is, but you can see here helicopter to the left. I don't know what it hit, but whatever it did hit, I think it's moving because you see that move to the right. I'm not sure. It could well be a moving target. So I don't know what that hit. That hit is dark as well, smoke. So could be some oil fuel involved. Yeah. Anyway, um, there is some resistance from the Russian military. We heard in the news piece I shared with you that some sort of 40% of the security forces turned up for Operation Fortress, defending some key installations. So not everyone seems to be behind the kind of Russian, the Kremlin uh, uh, defensive requests. I don't know whether that's some people are talking that Friday night was a really good time to do that because there's a lot of drinking involved, people weren't ready, etc., etc. Um, I'm not 100% sure. And then it's just all sorts of stuff going on. I mean, I could just go through these Twitter feeds and just talk about a whole bunch of things like pictures of Wagner PMC private military equipment in Lipetsk. So this is the one to the north of Voronezh. They are on the move. This is a serious thing. This isn't just for show. And yeah, just all sorts of stuff going on. Russia bombing itself, as Andrew Perpetua says, more kind of footage of internal uh, issues. Here we have roads being taken out. Some kind of activity has gone on, so that there is all sorts to report. That's broadly where I'm at now in terms of what I know. Let's go back to the live feed and see what has been said. Let's just put Neil Muggins on there. Thank you very much for recognizing I have reached that key number of 19,846. That is what I wanted. I've always dreamed of that number. So it's really great that I got to 20,092. Really happy with that. So thank you. Everyone loves an arbitrary celebration point. Me, no less than anyone else. So thank you for all your support for everyone there in that. Are there any questions? Let's have a look. Uh, who has better command and control? Okay, if we go back to the map, actually, this might be of use. So, one of the key things, not so much command and control, I am going to talk about logistics. As Phillips O'Brien said earlier, I reported in my news piece or actually in my mapping update, that Russia or that Wagner are sitting on the windpipes of Russian logistics into Ukraine and for their army. I mean, if you've got Rostov under your control, and if you've got Voronezh under your control, and Belgorod is a bit funky, then actually, how does the conventional Russian MOD continue to support the war effort all along this front line? You've got access to Kerch Bridge, now controlled Wagner. Arguably, oh, actually, this is Krasnodar, but there are talks about how Wagner are making a bid for Krasnodar as well. So actually, it could be that the Russians still have the ability to supply over the Kerch Bridge, but everywhere else, Wagner are now essentially dictating what can and can't go into uh, Ukraine and to the occupied territories to support the war effort. So that is really significant. But as far as the larger question of command and control, it's really difficult to say. I mean, I'm not too. I don't sing the praises of Russian command and control anyway. Uh, the problem for the Russians, I think, will be that they have most of their army inside Ukraine, and so when it comes to defending Moscow uh, from Wagner, they're in a bit of trouble. I don't know whether Wagner will have enough to really properly threaten Moscow. I mean, you need quite a lot of troops. Moscow's a huge city. You think about Kiev, right? And the failure to take Kiev, given the huge number of troops that they did have, still not nearly enough. The Russians. So Wagner going to Moscow are going to rely not on their troops, but they are going to rely on people in key positions being turncoats. They are going to rely on either and or politicians and military people turning on the Kremlin and moving over to the Wagner side. That's the only way that they can take control of Moscow. They can't do that with the number of troops they have. They require the troops that they come across to just completely give up. Will that happen? I don't know. We have seen it happen already. Will it happen in Moscow? Watch this space, I guess. Any other questions? I'm sure there are lots of questions. Sorry, this is completely, obviously, as you know, unscripted and live, and I'm just on my Todd here. Uh, let's have a look at this question. Will this decrease the chance of Russia causing a meltdown the nuclear power plant in Enerhodar? This is a huge question anyway. I mean, this is of massive significance, and I'm sure people have been working on this behind the scenes, but this has been one of those things where almost not enough people in the West have been up in arms about what's going on at Enerhodar, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, because they have set explosives there. They'd mined it, and that would be absolutely catastrophic if they used that. If they weaponized that nuclear power plant, then I'm pretty sure that that would be the red line where NATO would just obliterate. So I've talked about this previously, but the West, like Biden, the U.S. administration, NATO, and allies have very clearly told Putin and the Russians what will happen in the event of the use of a nuclear warhead. As far as I understand it, the rumors at the time were it would be a conventional response, a conventional war response. So if the Russians were to use a tactical nuke, or if they were to blow up, I think the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant as well, NATO would, I assume, do something like just take out the Russian fleets. I don't know, Black Sea Fleet or something. They would just basically obliterate a number of ships just like that. And Russia know this, and the combined capacity and capabilities of NATO far outstrip those of the Russians. The Russians are arguably the third strongest army, third greatest army in Ukraine at the moment. So you got the Ukrainians, then you got Wagner, then you got the Russian MOD. Now, yes, they have a fairly decent navy, and they've got some good air force capabilities, but they are struggling to to win a war against Ukraine, right? And NATO should be able to just take out key Russian military targets really, really quickly. And I'm under the understanding that Putin knows this, and that's why there's no chance of him pressing that red button or starting, moving towards triggering a nuclear attack. So, would Russia really do anything at the nuclear power plant? Is that just a kind of bit of saber rattling? I mean, it is really problematic that they've got mines in there. More than anything, mistakes can happen, right? You are just making it easier for a massive catastrophe to take place, even if you really don't have any intentions of going through on it. But I don't know if this increases or decreases it because there are just so many unknowns. I don't really, I'm still trying to get my head around exactly what is taking place at the moment. Um, okay, so other questions? Duh, 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 duh. I don't know. So America is numb to all the wars we have been fighting for the rest of the world, the Middle East. We do get that oil. We have our own. I'm not really sure that. I don't know. That might be someone who's trying to side, I guess, with the Russians a little bit, and I can't quite understand the question there. But it may or may not. Sorry if I missed that. If Wagner take Russia, what happens in Africa, Mali, etc.? Will they look to advance there also? Wow. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of worry in the West of the world. They are very aware. I mean, Anthony Blinken was talking about this last year, how Wagner are a real threat in Africa, across Africa. So they are really in the spotlight now, Wagner, in a way that they weren't previously. Yes, people knew that they were active in Mali, Sudan, and all these other places in Africa. Diamond mines and other natural resources and whatnot. But now we know much more about Wagner, or at least Wagner in the public sphere, so much more that actually it's kind of opened up what is going on in Africa to the general population. If you think, like you and I, did we know all that much about Wagner last year or in 2021? No, no. Realistically, no, we didn't. Do we know a lot about them now? Yes. Does that mean that there's going to be much more public posturing and policies against Wagner? Yes. So on the one hand, if Prigozhin takes over uh, in the Kremlin, you could see that maybe that might be to the benefit of the goings on in Africa. But on the other hand, I think the West is going to be really strong on Russia going forward, and probably Wagner as well. Now, what's worth noting here is why uh, Wagner being so effective is because they are doing the work for the Russian government without it being the Russian government, right? And that's really useful for Putin. So it's like, yep, you are aiding our international interests. You're getting a load of money. We're getting some of that money, or whatever, however the arrangement is. We're getting soft power as well in these places. So Wagner being separate from the Russian government allows them to do those things in places like places like Africa, places like Myanmar, and other places around the world. Now, if Prigozhin takes over, you then are blurring those lines, and Wagner then look like they are more officially part of the Russian uh, national infrastructure, military infrastructure, in a much more kind of formal way. So if Prigozhin takes over there, that could be a little bit more of a problem for if Prigozhin's in the Kremlin. It could be a little bit more of a problem for Wagner going forward. But that's just me, spitballing there. Um, do I know what I'm talking about? I don't know. You be the guest. You be the judge of that. Right. Uh, should Ukraine take out the Kursk bridge? Thanks, Bob, and thanks for all your. You're always one of the first on there. Thanks for all your support. Good man. Bob says, should Ukraine take out the Kursk bridge now? I've been a bit 50-50 on the Kursk bridge. The Kerch bridge. Sorry, it's not Kursk. Kursk, unless you do mean a bridge in Kursk. If you mean the Kerch bridge, then let's go and have a look at the map again. So here we have the map. We have the Kerch bridge here between Crimea and Krasnodar. Ukraine, I think, could deal some damage to that now. We've seen storm shadows hit here at Chonhar, at the bridge there. They could do some damage to that bridge. it is still not fully operational for the train line, and actually that's the main concern. So I guess they don't need to hit it yet unless they really want to take out the road connection as well. But there are some saying that they might need that to be in place so that if they make Crimea untenable, the Russians have an option to get off Crimea as easily as possible. Build a golden bridge or whatever for your retreating enemies. So there is a theory that actually the Kerch Bridge shouldn't be hit. uh, by all means, hit all these other bridges and logistical points and whatnot, but allow the Russians an easy get out of Crimea card. But I guess for me, if they do hit the bridge, the main one to hit would be the rail bridge, um, as that is what the army would more likely use to move large amounts of kit around rather than the road. So that's my answer to that question. Right, let's get back to it over here. Troll warning. Good to have the trolls back on board. I suppose well, as long as they're still getting paid, right? Hopefully they're still able to afford their mortgage. Looking at what's going to happen in the next week, mind you, it seems like the trolls are very much paid by Prigozhin. So Prigozhin has that big troll factory, doesn't he? And that was this is an important point actually. So, and I know lots of Americans of a certain political persuasion like to deny this, and lots of British people also like to deny it with regard to Brexit. But we know 100%, 100% that Russians meddled in the in the elections, in the 2016 elections in the US and 2020 degree, and in the Brexit elections as well. And at least with regard to trolls. So what's really interesting is seeing what we know now about troll activity on my threads. Just think about, for those of you who are regulars to my channel, we have trolls on my threads, right? And you know how they act, what they say. They have their kind of pat protocols that they use. So very often it's like they'll give you an identifier in their very first comment. Like I for example, one of my regular ones, his very first comment, which was nothing to do with what the video was about. It's like, I'm a black person who voted for the Democrats, who voted for Biden. I'll never vote for Biden again. And then went and to talk about like pro-Russian stuff. And you're like, what they do is they give an identifier. In this case, it was like, I'm a black Biden supporter or ex-Biden supporter. So it's like, if you are one of those characteristics, you then sympathize or empathize with them, and that's how they get you on board. And then they give the pro-Russian stuff, and then you go, well, I'm that person as well. Should I be supporting pro-Russian stuff? So it might be, I'm a white woman from here, or I'm a working class woman from Turkey, or whatever the identifier is that they put in their first comment. That's to get other people like that on board and to get you to empathize with them, and then they pull you in with their narrative, right? Now they're doing all this and they're spreading misinformation and disinformation, sorry, on my threads. We've seen that. You guys understand that. To think that they won't do that in other contexts is just really naive. Of course, they are going to do that in any political context. So we need to really be, I mean, like governmentally and structurally, infrastructurally, in terms of IT, we need to be on this our governments need to be on this big time. Any future election, there are going to be people all over Twitter, all over Facebook, all over YouTube doing what they're doing on my videos with these things, doing it out there in other contexts. I get reported for inappropriate videos, which aren't inappropriate, but then YouTube shut them down. And then I have to appeal, and then they get like allowed back in or whatever. And that is their way of trying to affect this narrative that I'm giving. So imagine I was of any given political persuasion. I don't think the Russians care about the politics of the countries they're meddling with. They care about sowing discord. So in some countries they'll support the far left, and other countries they'll support the far right, and probably some countries they'll support the far left and the far right at the same time. They'll support one extreme that will be the most useful for them to sow discord in that country, and they will get on to the social media platforms to sow that discord in the same way that we see them do it on my threads every day and every other pro-Ukrainian YouTube channel. That's what they do. We need to expect that. So when you are interacting with people in the context of politics, I don't know, in the next election cycle, in whatever country you live in, be aware that there is a really strong chance that some of the people you're going to be talking to, and they may support your position or they may be completely against your position, depending on what the context is, there will be people who are Russian doing, spreading whatever message they are spreading for the purposes of the Russian government. And remember, it's Prigozhin who has one of the biggest troll factories, and one of the, and I talked about it in my video on trolls and bots. And so I think that is pretty significant. Thank you so much to Javier Alvarez. Massive thanks, Jonathan. Keep up the great job. Thank you. Awesome. Really appreciate that. Thanks for being a member. And same to Carlos Durand for this evening's Cabernet Sauvignon Fund. Do you know what? I don't think so. For those who don't know, I did a breaking update last night. As I said at the beginning of this, I was a bit half cut because I'd had a couple of gin and tonics in the next door neighbour's caravan. They got this new caravan, and they're like, "Come around. What do you want? Gin and tonic?" And me and my partner were like, "Yeah, we'll have a gin and tonic." Several G&Ts later, lovely time. Came back to ours and then cracked open a bottle of wine. Think it's Friday evening. Just going to relax. We started watching Litvinenko, which is an ITV UK dramatisation of the murder of Litvinenko in London in, I think, 2006 by the Russians. And it was very apropos that suddenly I was looking at my phone, because of course I'm looking at my phone while trying to watch a really good piece of TV. And it was like exploding. And it's like, oh my God, Helena, I said, this is a bit nuts. I might have to do a video when we go to bed. So you go to bed, I'm going to do a video. So I came in and did a video to talk about that, and I was half cut. But according to most people, I made quite a lot of sense. So, some people were quite amusingly saying, I think you should drink more often before you do videos. Yeah, I'm not sure. It is a tippling philosopher, so it makes sense. Jiffy, another awesome member. Thank you so much. Sorry, Jiri. I don't know how to pronounce actually your name at all. Jiri Herbeck. Prigozhin was, and thanks for your super chat, I really appreciated it. Prigozhin was originally supported by FSB, or still is. It suggests FSB is trying to get rid of Putin now using Prigozhin. They may open the door for him to Moscow, just thinking. And congrats on the 19,892. Actually, it's more about the 19,947. That's definitely the number. So there's so much speculation we can do with regard to this. So Prigozhin has, over time, undoubtedly offered utility for Putin and arguably for the FSB, if not necessarily for the Russian military, who, like the conventional military, the MOD, who don't like him, they don't like each other, right? But he hasn't fallen out of the window. And he hasn't fallen out of the window. Why? So he must have some use for Putin. Now, I was talking yesterday about Putin, and sorry to repeat myself, but Putin lives in an information bubble of his own making. So he doesn't trust the internet. So he doesn't look at the internet. He thinks it's a CIA tool. He doesn't have a smartphone. He won't look at, laptop or whatever to go and check anything. So whenever he's given information, he cannot verify it independently. You cannot verify it personally independently. So think about what you do when someone says something bonkers to you and you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that's true, or something you're a bit 50-50 about. The first thing you do is you go and check online. You look at Wikipedia, you look at this, you look at that, blah blah blah, and you ask your friends and all this kind of stuff online. You go on Facebook, and then people are like, no, yes, and you work out what you think is the best representation of reality, right? Putin, if he doesn't have any of that, what happens when he is told something? What does he do when he needs to verify or disconfirm that? He has to go back to the people who have told him that in the first place, or someone else who is still an external person who is curating information to Putin. And so therefore, his way of confirming is going back. It goes back into that cycle. Well, how do I know that the person that I've asked to confirm this or disconfirm this is telling the truth? How do I confirm what he is saying or she is saying? And so therefore, he just has no ability to break out that information bubble. And this is largely, I think, what explains how he decided to invade in the first place, which is a load of BS information going up the chain. As I explained yesterday in Varangio, this BS, that everyone is lying to each other. But then as it gets nearer the top, people then start believing that. And then the person at the top is getting that information, can't disconfirm it, can't verify it, so has to take it at face value and says, okay, right, so the Ukrainians love us, they're all Nazis, they're all drug addicts, right, let's invade them and let's turn over the government, right? And he doesn't have the information that is accurate that would disconfirm that. And so he goes and does that, and then it all goes wrong. And even during the war, he's still not told the truth. So the Russian MOD is lying. They're giving out bonkers figures. Putin recently has been talking about the amount of tank losses and APV losses, and he's pulling those numbers out of his posterior. No, he's pulling out of Shoigu's posterior and then presenting these numbers. And they're obviously completely nuts. Now, he probably believes them, though. Isn't it him like spinning a yarn? This is him saying, look, the Ukrainians have lost this much because I've been told that they've lost this much. So when it goes back to Prigozhin, he's had a utility for Putin, and Putin probably doesn't realize what Prigozhin has been saying for months and months and months, because no one's going to be telling him that. Prigozhin's saying that on his Telegram channel. Putin's got no clue about what, he probably doesn't even know what Telegram is, right? And he's told what he's told. And the Russian MOD would be, and the FSB will be telling him whatever they think is useful. But he must, in some way, have found utility for Prigozhin. Now, I think what's happened is there's been this tipping point where he has been told what's going on. And I think it started just a sort of week or so ago when he had those military bloggers in for a press conference kind of thing, had that photo shoot with them, and then kept them in for half an hour when there were no cameras around. And there were military bloggers that came out of that that said, we told things to Putin that he had never heard before. And those are critical, quite often very critical military bloggers who are critical of the Russian MOD. So he is now hearing stuff that's critical of the Russian MOD, and he's probably hearing about what Prigozhin is doing. And now the Russian MOD is saying probably to him, oh, by the way, Prigozhin really has said all this stuff. And now there's this coup going on. So Prigozhin is now like exhausted his utility for Putin, but it's a bit late. I mean, Putin, unfortunately, well, really should have got him a long time ago. Unfortunately, for Putin, Prigozhin was particularly useful for him in Bakhmut and on the front lines. So you've got this situation where, yeah, it's come back to bite Putin, and that's a direct result, I think, of not being able to break out that information bubble. Anyway, thanks for that, Jiri. Thank you so much for Der Walde bist du. For that super sticker. Really appreciate that and all your continued support. And of course, to Urbench as well. Really appreciate that. From, I believe, is that the sign for the Israeli currency. So thank you. And again, indeed, Urbench, really appreciate that even more so. So thank you. Really supportive there. Very kind. Now to Stefan Heinzmann, who says, and thank you so much for the super chat, says, Jonathan, do you believe that Putin needs to pull his military from Ukraine in order to fend off the coup? Great question. I think he might do. But the problem is that military is really low morale and probably really doesn't, it depends, what units. If you're talking about some of the mobilized and some of the convicts, no. So you would have to rely on pulling your elite units. They've been, diluted anyway. That would then severely weaken the front line and could present a really diamond opportunity for the Ukrainians. But this could be a dilemma. One of the military things is don't present the opposition with a problem, because with a problem there's a solution, right? Oh, there's a problem, I can solve that, no worries, done and dusted, right? You present people with a dilemma, which is, okay, if you do A, you're screwed, and if you do B, you're screwed, but in a different way. So what are you going to do, A or B? So present with a dilemma. This is not so much a Ukrainian that Ukraine have presented this dilemma to the Russians, but this is a dilemma of their own making, which is, if we do nothing, then Prigozhin's going to more likely be able to have success in marching on Moscow. But if we do something, it's going to be taking some of our forces, and probably our very best forces, away from the front line in Ukraine, and taking those forces and bring them back to Moscow, and then Ukraine attack on the front line, and we're screwed. So yeah, great question, and I think it just talks to the dilemma that Putin's probably in. Would this increase his chances of survival, or would it go down so badly with his people so he's doomed anyway? I, as far as is, I just don't know whether Prigozhin has enough to to make this a successful coup attempt. I just don't know. It could be, it might not be. It's going to depend on how many people in the public sphere, like the propagandists, who might secretly be behind it. You've had a lot of people coming out to support Putin. Yes, Kadyrov, Ramzan Kadyrov. He knows which side his bread is buttered, and he doesn't like Prigozhin. But when you're talking about the public sphere, like sports people, propagandists, politicians, people in charge of annexed areas of Ukraine, have all come out and support Putin. But there'll be a lot of people, I'm sure, that'll be watching how things go. And as is human nature, if people aren't really bothered either way, they're going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be going for whoever looks like they're going to win. So I'm just going to wait this one out, see which way the wind blows, and then put my sails up. Uh, so it's really difficult to know whether Prigozhin will be successful and whether Putin is doomed without knowing, having a sense of what those important people within the elite circles in Moscow and your oligarchs and your military and all those people, what they really believe, and whether any of them are being tapped up successfully by Prigozhin. So a really great question, and thank you so much for that, Stefan. Thank you to all of you. You are all legends. And thank you to Edwin Surrett, who has become a YouTube member. Thank you, Edwin. Really appreciate that. Good stuff. So let's get back to some of the live comments. Hopefully, my answers have been somewhat coherent. It's quite difficult to like obviously react to everything in real time and try and work out my thoughts. My brain struggles on the best of days, let alone a today like this, where it's just like inundated with information. And that is a challenge as well. Is as we're thrown so much information out there in the information space, you know, we need to still make sure that we are trying to build up an accurate picture of what is going on. Rather than just sucking up everything that we read, especially if it accords with our own desires. That's called the wishful thinking fallacy, and it can get you in hot water when it comes to having an accurate understanding of reality. Let's see if there's anything on the socials just to add into what we've already found out. Photos of the column of military equipment is suggesting Wagner is in the city of Yelets in the Lipetsk region. The distance to Moscow is less than 400 kilometers. Right, let's go and look and see where Yelets is. That's in the Lipetsk region here. As they're coming up from Voronezh, they're going to be driving up this road, and there's Yelets. So there's been a convoy spotted there halfway through the Lipetsk region. I mean, they're making pretty swift, pretty swift going at the moment, isn't it? They're getting to Moscow fairly quickly. Another helicopter downed in Tambov. Wow. So the Russians are causing. I mean, poor Oryx is going to have to create another list. He thought he was getting out of this on the 1st of October. I mean, the war could be over by then, but he might have another 6 lists to add, given what Prigozhin and Wagner are doing. Voronezh Oblast governor has issued a statement in support of Russian President Putin, saying there can be no justification for the mutineers. He said Russia's military is conducting operational and combat activities in the oblast amid the Wagner Group's ongoing armed rebellion. Wow. So there is support there, but I mean, goodness, it's just incredible. Who would have predicted this a couple of days ago? The armed forces of Ukraine have been conducting offensive operations in Tavria operations, so that's Zaporizhia, on the flanks of Bakhmut. So just remember that while all this is going on, Ukrainians are still fighting and the Russians are still having to defend. Like I said to you earlier, I'm really interested in what the Russians fighting on these fronts are now going to be thinking. Are they going to be reticent to do? Take someone like Robotina or Piatikhatki, or Velika Novosilka, where the Russians are using offense as a form of defense by trying to, push back at the Ukrainians as soon as the Ukrainians make some advances. Now you're thinking, oh, what's going on? Are we in the middle of a mutiny? Is the Russian army going to be under Putin or Prigozhin in the next like 48 hours? Do we go on the attack? Does this like hold them off? Does this play to the advantage of the Ukrainians on the front lines right now over the next 24 hours? Will there be a kind of operational confusion by the armed forces in the armed forces of the Russians, such that you know the Ukrainians can make hay while the sun shines? I don't know, uh, but I guess we will see. Um, More Wagner gear has arrived in Rostov from Luhansk. So this goes back to the question someone else mentioned earlier, which is, are they going to pull troops to support the Russians? Well, here we've got troops being pulled out of Luhansk. They might not be on the front lines. They could have been in R&R or a training camp or whatever, but they're being pulled from Luhansk to support the Wagner activities in Rostov. Right, let's have a look and see what Gherkin thinks. Evil Gherkin on Prigozhin's plan. He sent a few thousand of its best troops to Moscow, hoping the officials will run and Moscow will fall quickly. Meanwhile, the foothold in Rostov will provide some security. Supplying this advancing force will be challenging, however. I guess that sounds about right. So the strategic idea of Prigozhin's team is extremely clear, logical, very risky, but it strikes with courage and has a chance of success in an atmosphere of sluggishness and demotivation of all power structures of the Russian Federation. So this is Igor Gherkin seeming to, without very openly supporting Prigozhin, the language is very much, supportive of Prigozhin's desires, I guess. Strategy has only two vulnerabilities: a possibility of a clash with relatively large units that are combat ready and do not want to surrender or remain neutral before approaching Moscow, and inevitable in this case, problems with supplying the strike force, which will not be able to fight in isolation without supply for longer than a couple of days. And here, the Wagner strategists again guessed the decision to dig in, part of the forces in Rostov, and attract the efforts of those who are still ready to fight, at least at the level of intentions for the Kremlin. So it could be that Rostov becomes, as we see with the Akhmat and the Chechens going into Rostov, that could be where there could be some kind of pitched battle between these two Russian positions. The Akhmat here, another column spotted in the city of Aksai, 15 minutes from Rostov. Let's have a look where Aksai is. So we have Rostov just here. Is that 15 minutes from the city of Rostov, I wonder, or from Rostov on Don Oblast? I don't know. Yeah, I can't see where Aksai is, so it could be from it could be outside of the Rostov Oblast. I'll have to Google that a bit later. So yeah, lots of activity taking place still, as you can imagine. Right, let's go back to a couple of questions. See if they're, oops, I don't know why I've pushed that one up. Right, okay. Something is going on in Belarus. Government plane went to Turkey at midnight. If you missed the beginning of this live stream, I did talk about that. So any of you who have joined, we've got the Lukashenko's plane. Either his family or his family and him are on board and on the way to Turkey, which is interesting. And Putin's plane is on the way to St. Petersburg. Akhmat is 85 kilometers from Rostov. Thierry says, I don't know, Thierry, if that is a city. If you can let me know, that'd be really good. Thanks, mate. Has this, so here we go. Right, let's go to this one. So, excellent live today. Thank you, BD Warren, and thank you for being a member and your kindness here. You're always on point when it comes to sifting through the information spaghetti that is the socials. Yes, I like to prepare you a filling bolognese to get your teeth into. I just hope I am making sense of the crazy amounts of data that's being thrown out. Thanks for your support, WD Warren. Good person. And Eubanks DVDs, thank you again. Often supports. Thank you for your tireless efforts to keep us updated, informed, and sometimes entertained. Well, thank you. It is sometimes exhausting for me. Sometimes I get off and my brain is just like, and it's odd with this. Like sometimes I think, how can I still be kind of obsessed with all this stuff? Because when you do something all the time, it loses its kind of it's a law of diminishing returns in economics. So if you're in a desert and you have like a pint of water after a week of not drinking anything, well, you'd be dead. But you've had a pint of water, it have a huge amount of utility, and you'd be like, "Oh, that's the best pint of water I've ever had." Second pint of water would be, "Yeah, it's a good pint of water, but it's not as good as that first one." And each successive one, you have a diminishing returns of utility. So it's the same for me doing this. Like you do anything, the more you do it, the kind of less utility you get out of it. But I'm still like, sometimes I'm on the socials at night preparing my stuff for the morning after, and I just want to jump on there and then. I'm like, oh, I've got to tell them this. Oh, this is really interesting. Oh my goodness. And I'm like fighting back the need to just jump on and talk about it there and then the night before. So this still, it is something that still I find fascinating, and goodness me, no more than today, I guess. Um, so, Beach Boy here says, "Hi, Jonathan. Thank you. There was a theory that Wagner camp was attacked from behind by Russian missiles, but in reality, was Ukraine's special forces spreading confusion and havoc. Do you see Ukraine using the opportunity?" I am not sure there's any evidence yet that the camp was actually attacked, and this is what some people are saying, that actually it could be just completely, I think it's more likely it's completely made up. So what you we are pretty certain, as I don't know if you caught all of this live, but we're pretty certain that Wagner have been planning this, or Prigozhin's been planning this for some time, that they've been siphoning off shells and ammunition, complaining that they don't have enough ammunition for the MOD, but actually they did. They were just siphoning it off, arguably, getting at stockpiling equipment, javelins, and captured Western equipment and all sorts of stuff, siphoning it off, ready for an attack. You had to do that for a couple of months, but just as importantly, you need to be putting out feelers to Moscow and getting people on board, so that when you get there, it's not just you and 25,000 troops trying to take Moscow and they all don't want you there. It's like, we've got people in key places that are going to switch when the time is right. So they'll be doing that, and that takes a lot of planning. What they needed was a trigger for this. So they needed there to be a tipping point to say, right, now we're doing this. I can't believe that's happened. We're going to do this. And to me, it seems much more plausible that they've invented that trigger point, which is because they said this before. It happened around Bakhmut, and that could have been a kind of precursor to this. So do you remember around Bakhmut when they captured a Russian conventional forces commander and accused him of taking out, so accused him of taking the weapons away from disarming a group of Wagners. They accused him of, I think, attacking Wagner troops with artillery, so on and so forth. They gave him a rough up, and they got him to admit this all on camera. Then they let him go, and then subsequently he went on camera for the Russians and said, "That was a load of rubbish." Who knows what actually happened? But that is a kind of like, I think, a bit of a precursor to this, which is, we are being attacked by our own. Right? This is what Wagner's saying. We're being attacked by our own. We've got this big division between us and the Russian MOD. Gerasimov and uh, Shoigu don't know what they're doing. They're rubbish. The Russian MOD are rubbish, etc., etc. That goes on. That narrative continues. That rhetoric continues. And then he's like, but we need this one big thing for us to then flip. And it is this, oh, we've been attacked. We've had a missile attack on our base, but there's no proof of that. We've seen, I think, 2 bits of footage of the base, but there's no kind of, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure Thierry will get back to me on this saying, actually there is or there isn't. So, I'd be interested to know if this is the case, but I don't think there's any proof that that base was actually hit. So I don't think Ukraine were involved. I think that that was made up by Prigozhin, and that gives him an excuse to start this pre-prepared coup, which didn't start as a coup. It started, I think, as a kind of military coup, or like wanting to get rid of Gerasimov and Shoigu. But then Putin came out and gave his speech earlier this morning, as I said in my news piece, and then uh, Wagner Telegram channel said, "Yeah, we're going to have a new president." So now it looks very much like a coup. Um, in reality, was Ukraine special forces spreading confusion and havoc? I'm sure that they'll be doing everything they can to ameliorate that confusion and havoc. Do you see Ukraine using the opportunity? Yes, definitely. This will be a case of like Zaluzhny, Budanov, everyone's going to be together going, right, Zelensky, right, guys, this is all our Christmases that happen at once. Certainly for the short term, like Prigozhin's a horrible human and a psycho, and we might not want him in charge instead of Putin. But right now, what can we do? And I mean, part of me wonders whether actually this could push forward one of the main counteroffensive strikes, like the absolute confusion that's going on now. Uh, Potential forces being pulled away from the front line. Do they go right? Now's the time to attack. We might lose a lot to minefields, but the confusion is just too good an opportunity to miss. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure there will be opportunism from the Ukrainians. There would have to be. You'd be churlish not to. Um, but thank you so much, Beach Boy, for the super chat and for the kindness and the question. Little Whiskey Shop became a YouTube member. Thank you. Always has great comments, Little Whiskey Shop. So thank you for that membership. Ollie Wright says, and thank you, Ollie, will Wagner allow supplies to continue to get to the Russian army in Ukraine through Rostov, given that the army is ordered to attack Wagner? This is kind of what I was talking about earlier, that they are sitting on the windpipes of the supplies to the Ukrainian front line. I wonder whether they will stop that from happening. That could itself lead directly to Russian frontline casualties. I don't know how well that would sit with people who might otherwise support Wagner. I don't know is the answer to that question, but that's a really good question. It's something I've thought about. Uh, I guess they could do. So the question is the question with everything is why do anything, right? What are their intentions? So do does Prigozhin want the Russian forces to fail on the front line to the degree that it makes the Russian armed forces hierarchy look incompetent? That would be the only reason that he would. I think he would do something like that. Is if it plays into his objectives. Uh, if he gets a benefit out of the Russians doing badly because it makes Gerasimov and Shoigu look rubbish. And then he says, "Well, look what's happened on the front lines. Look at this disaster. Look at the counteroffensive." And he's been talking about that recently, of course, hasn't he? He's been saying how well the Ukrainians have been doing and how badly the Russians have been doing. So if something plays into that narrative, you could see him do that. So I could see there being rationale for him sitting on supplies and not letting them get to the front line. But likewise, you can also see that he might want Russia to succeed on point the fact that he's fighting for that same goal essentially. The big picture. So it could be that there there is also rationale for him not doing that as well. That's not answered your question, or it's answered it with every answer conceivable. But as a great, great question, and we shall see. How many of Wagner's are still in Ukraine, and where are they? Is another good question. Thanks, little big man. Thanks for the super chat. How many are there? I don't know. They have been pulled back. Have been reports that some of them are still active in Bakhmut, and that indeed in Bakhmut, the Ukrainians are capturing a large number of people. I think there's a large amount of people caught in Orokova Vasilivka to the north of Bakhmut the other day. They're just capturing lots of people in general. I think the POWs are a large POW exchange fund at the moment. And so in Bakhmut, we're pretty sure that Wagner are still active to some degree, even though they said they're not and they pulled them all out. They will mainly be in training camps and R&R, having R&R behind the scenes, but I'm not sure that there'll be all that many there because I think this has been planned for several months and he would have been pulling them out for this reason. So when he pulled them out by June the 5th, wasn't it? Was it June the 5th? He pulled everyone out of Bakhmut, or Wagner supposedly, even though there are a few there. He would have been trying to execute the early stages of his plan for this coup then, I would have thought. So maybe not as many as you might think. They're probably mainly in the Russian interior now, doing what they are doing. Uh, Thank you for Kernrad Kainet for becoming a member, and I'm sorry for butchering your name. I love a good challenge. Goodness me, trying to say Ukrainian place names on a daily basis is enough to make a grown man cry. And sometimes I just go to bed and wail myself to sleep just because I've mispronounced bleeding Robertina again. Uh, but there you go. That's my problem, not yours. Unless you're listening, in which case it could be an oral problem of yours. Thank you for your great coverage, says Puddock. Thank you so much for your super chat. Goodness me, everyone's been really kind today. Ron in Aberdeen, Scotland. It's so great to see so many people from around the world and some of my fellow countrymen from up and down the British Isles as well. Really, really great. So thank you for that. Really appreciate your support there. And he's become a member as well, which is awesome. So thank you, Puddock. Very kind indeed. So I guess we're almost coming to the end. I don't know how much stuff I have left in my head to share with you. I will just continue here though. So CPO fast forward. Thank you so much for your Canadian generosity. Is it time for the Russian Legion and such troops to push across the border? What happens if they do? This question was asked in one of my YouTube video threads from today earlier. So someone said, should they support Wagner? And my answer to that is probably not. I probably wouldn't get into bed with any of the Russian entities there, but I would take this opportunity to hit some places in Belgorod for sure. Uh, I'd probably stay away from Voronezh. So let's go and have a look at this on the map, actually, get a sense of what's going on. It's a great question. Is it time for the Russian Legion and groups to push across the border? What happens if they do? I'm going to hide that just so I can look at my map a little bit more here, also you guys can see it. So what we're talking about here, so Voronezh is this oblast here that borders from, I don't know if you can see that dotted line, borders from there to there. That's Luhansk. And then we come on to Belgorod from there over all the way past Belgorod itself to about there. That's a large border shared with Ukraine. And where it seems that the Wagner troops and forces are going up here through Voronezh, they are probably having nothing to do with Belgrade at the moment. I would suggest that these Russian entities here just do some stuff to destabilize Belgrade and continue. I mean, this would be a really great time. The more I'm thinking about it, the more your question, yeah, is I'm getting oddly excited. I would. So when you're Zelensky, and Bundov and everyone getting together, Stursky and whoever, right, what should we do, guys? One of them has surely got to be, yeah, let's really support those guys going into Belgrade because at the moment, Putin and everyone else's backs are turned or they are concerned with stuff going on here. It's absolutely prime time to cause merry havoc in Belgrade. You could really cause some issues for the Russians there. So yeah, I think that's eminently a really sensible thing to do, but I wouldn't do it in overt support of Prigozhin at all. Just what would be and their kind of ideology. Maybe I don't really know what Prigozhin's ideology particularly is, but I'm fairly sure he's fairly nationalistic. It could be that those anti-Putin, pro-Ukrainian, or they're not, are they so much pro-Ukrainian as anti-Putin fighters? They might have some common ground with Wagner and Prigozhin. So they might end up doing something like that. But I would say that would be a bad idea, to be honest. Yeah, so thank you for that. It's a really good question. And another one here from De Waldbistu. Since Russian government had only hate and division to offer, isn't it logical that now Russians start fighting themselves? Well, it's quite a kind of a nice, big, out there, abstract question there. I mean, this is a problem for the Russians in general. Is they're not fighting for anything. It's they are like not in the way that Ukrainians are. So the Ukrainians, as I so often have said, they are fighting for country, family, homeland, culture, friends, loved ones, etc., etc., and a future and a positive version of the future. So they're fighting for something positive, which is for them EU membership, democratic transparency, membership of groups of countries with which they are ideologically aligned or to which they aspire to be like. Okay, that is a positive idea of what they're fighting for. Russians have gone into Ukraine with this kind of hate, which is these are all Nazis. We're fighting against that. We want to eradicate their language. We want to eradicate their culture. We want to eradicate their identity. It's a very negative thing, and it is about hate and division. Uh, and it's not so much about saying we are going to present you with this positive version of what you could be. Instead, they're saying we're going to take away your passports and make you have a Russian passport. And if you don't have a Russian passport, we're going to take away your house. Literally the sort of thing that's taking place in the occupied regions. Or we're going to mobilize you to send you to your, quite likely death. Where's the positivity there? Where's a kind of sense of really positive sense of what you're fighting for and where you're going? Russian doesn't have any of that, and so is it a surprise that they've ended up eating themselves? No, not really. When you lead with division and hate, and when you lead with authoritarian kind of autocratic ideals, you aren't ever really like presenting a really positive idea of what you could be, because you're not talking about you as a people, you're talking about you as a person. I want this power and I want people to be like how I want them to be, rather than saying what do you guys want to be like so they call me a liberal lefty wishy-washy whatever, but if I was running a country it'd be nice to go, yeah, I've got a sense of what I would like you guys to be, but at the end of the day, you have a right to self-determination. Who do you guys want to be? Like, what's your sense of identity and national kind of cultural heritage? Like, uh, and there's no sense of that for Russia. So that kind of living under that dictatorial autocracy for so long, and people are politically disenfranchised, like I've said before, they are going to there's no like positive sense of who they are, and there's no even political desire to change things because they've had that kind of squashed out of them. And yeah, and so the snake eats itself. It doesn't surprise me, yeah, that they are fighting themselves. But thanks, developers too, and sorry for my just rambling answer to that, just splurging out of my head. And I listen to it myself, going, "Does that make any sense?" I'm not sure it does. Um, I don't know. It's just my brain, right? Jojo became a YouTube member. Thank you, Jojo. Such a great supporter, Jojo, as well. Really appreciate all the support, Jojo, that you've given to the channel over my lives and whatnot. Really great. Andrew Waters, thank you for your super chat and membership, Andrew. Do you think Prigozhin could put Putin on a plane to the Hague ICC as a means of getting rid of him? Oh, that would be incredibly ironic, wouldn't it? It's like a mass murderer shopping another mass murderer. He's committed loads of murders. Like, here's the evidence for it. Go and arrest him, police. Meanwhile, I'm just going to murder another 10 people over here. Don't mind me. That's that kind of thing, isn't it? He could shop him. It would be, yeah, quite bizarre. Um, what would the question, I suppose, connected to that is if Prigozhin did uh, take control, what would happen to Putin? Would Putin end up dying? Is there any way that Putin can survive this, literally existentially survive this in terms of his life, if Prigozhin uh, is successful? Would he would he end up in prison instead? I don't know. All of these options are available. Yeah, be interesting to see what takes place, but I don't know. But could he get rid of him to the Hague? I think it's probably unlikely. I think there are probably other ways that he'd be got rid of. I don't know whether they'd try to do things properly, like arrest and say try some kind of trumped up treason charges or something, or whether the only option is some kind of falling out of a window. Uh, I don't know. They're all possibilities, aren't they? But thank you, Andrew. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate your support. Um, just coming to to the end now. Dan, just found a live chat. Everyone drunk by now? Not me. I'm not drinking today. Uh, Smith, by the way, and can I say thank you to Smith? Because they reminded me that it was indeed 19,994. That was the number I said that I always wanted to get to, and so we're there now. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that, and thank you for reminding me. Do you think Ukraine knew this was coming and have had some time to think about what to do? That's a great question. And the answer is I don't know. Uh, it's answer to most of these questions. But as I said earlier, there was a tweet earlier from someone saying Ukraine had been saying that something is going to take place. Let's go and find that. It was way back here. No, it wasn't. Um, mm, Sorry for the delay here. It's one of these. Where are you? Uh, I can't find it. So anyway, yeah, there was this claim that they have been waiting for some time, and that this won't be surprising. It might be here actually. Uh, no, I must have got rid of it. Yeah, so I think Ukraine have been waiting for this for some time, um, uh, but I don't know whether they'd have definite news. Would definitely known exactly what was going to happen. There are these different rumors as to uh, you know what might be going on. You had their intelligence is fairly decent. You got to remember that there will be I mean, there's going to be leaks either way. So you're talking about a country of Ukraine where you've got annexed areas where there's a lot of pro-Ukrainians still living there who will be very willing to send stuff back to Ukraine, and there's going to be a lot of people in Ukraine who are pro-Russian who are sending back stuff back the other way. It's going to be a very porous information border, and I'm fairly sure Ukraine have pretty good intelligence as to what goes on. Uh, they probably know that something's up. They would have seen movements. They'll have access to the very best like imagery, satellite imagery, so they'll know the movements of Wagner pulling out, stockpiling, things going on. So that I imagine they would have had a fairly decent idea as to what, as to there being something about to happen. Just exactly what, who, maybe not. Um, but thank you for the question. Severance here says, in our joint excitement, can we take a minute to remember all those who haven't lived to see this? And this is really good. And thank you to your man here. Thank you for your super chat as well. Who actually lived in Kharkiv, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I do want to interview you. Please get hold of me. I think he's married to a Ukrainian and then had to leave at the beginning of the war and is now, I believe, in Australia. Uh, so there are things that he finds very difficult, uh, triggering memories of what it was like for him in the front. I don't want to speak for him, but I am in these places in where he lived in Ukraine, and of course, he as more than most of us watching here and me speaking will know the losses of people in Ukraine, and so yeah. Absolutely, it's really important to remember when we're talking on a daily basis about like troop losses and APV losses and all these losses, those are human lives on both sides as well. And there are big philosophical discussions to talk about the Russians who have perished. Do we just see them all as evil humans, or some of these are mobilized that are forced to go there, convicts? Maybe that's that dilemma again, another dilemma. It's like, do I spend another 5 years in this godforsaken hellhole, or do I go to fight for Wagner on the front line as my only way to freedom? Can you blame them for making that choice? That kind of thing. These are difficult decisions. Yeah, not all Russians are evil. So how do we feel about all of the Russians dying then as a means to an end, and all these kind of philosophical questions? But these are human lives and civilian lives and animal lives. The ecocide that's taken place. It's just the whole thing is hugely tragic. So that's a really, really good point, and well made. We should remember uh, the terrible reality of war. Super, super, super important. And if I ever forget to do that on a daily basis, call me out on that, because we can easily become desensitized to things that we talk about so much. And that can be an issue, and we need these reminders every so often that this is a very, very you know this is a terrible conflict with terrible ramifications uh, for everyone involved. Um, Visegrad 24 is claiming that Wagner are pulling men from Africa heading to Russia. Not seen any others claim it yet, though. That wouldn't surprise me. I mean, uh, so there's an important point here, and this is a really good question, really good point, really good stimulus. This is an existential situation for Prigozhin and for Wagner. If they fail, Prigozhin will die, almost certainly, or will at least spend the rest of his life behind bars. If not, he'll die. So therefore, he should be doing, and no doubt is doing, everything he can to make sure this will be as successful as possible. Yes, he might not get his finger in the diamond mine in Mali or wherever it is, over the next few weeks or whatever. But he needs those people. If he doesn't have those people, he'll be dead. And it doesn't matter how many diamond mines exist in Africa that Wagner have their fingers in, right? So I would assume that literally everyone and every resource that could be pulled in to support Wagner's project here are being brought to bear. Definitely. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, it would be ridiculous if they weren't being brought to support Prigozhin. Hope that makes sense. Thank you very much for the super chat. Anyway, I guess that is going to existential is indeed the catchword. Uh, if so, thank you very much for watching this. I really appreciate all of your support. If I go on any longer, I think I will lose my voice and my brain will just start dripping out my ears. Thank you for allowing me to talk to you about this. I think it is super developing, and there'll be lots more to be said, and it'll be easy to sit and talk about this 24 hours a day. But I've got a garden to go and sit in. There's sunshine out there, which again, remember, there are many people on the front line who won't be able to experience those simple joys of life. So so do bear that in mind. Thank you all for your massive support. Really, really do appreciate it. Take good care of yourselves, and I will not do an extra today. I've done clearly enough speaking for a week, and I will catch up with you guys tomorrow in tomorrow's news piece. Toodle pips, all the best.